On September 29, 2006, in St. Patrick's Church in Glasgow, United Kingdom, detectives discovered the body of a young woman. Little did they know, this crime was just the tip of the iceberg. Their investigation led them to one of the most ruthless serial offenders in the country. Peter Tobin was born on August 27, 1946, in Johnstone, Scotland. He was the youngest of 8 children in the family of Marjorie and Daniel Tobin. Early on, Peter exhibited a difficult character, prompting his parents to send him to a boarding school in 1953 when he was just 7 years old. However, this seemingly did not yield much benefit. Later on, he was sent to a correctional institution. After completing this period, Peter moved to Brighton, England. There he started a relationship with Margaret Mountney, a 17-year-old typist who found his personality irresistible. In August 1969, they got married. However, Peter soon revealed his cruel and controlling nature. Besides that, he was involved in criminal activities and was convicted and imprisoned for theft and forgery a year later. This led Margaret to divorce him in 1973. In the same year, Peter married Sylvia Jeffries, a local nurse who also fell for his charm. That year they had their first son and named him Daniel. Tragically, their daughter Kelly died shortly after birth in 1974. Grieving over their lost child and suffering from Peter's abusive treatment, Sylvia left in 1976 with their young son. Decades later, when Peter was in his 40s, he pursued a new romance again, this time with Kathy Wilson, who was only 16 years old at that time, vulnerable and impressionable, which made her easy prey for him. Together, they had a son named Daniel, the couple's only child. They married in 1989 and moved to Scotland. Proved challenging. Kathy couldn't go outside freely due to her husband's control over every aspect of her life. His violent behavior continued, reaching significant levels. Consequently, isolation exacerbated her living conditions. The young woman mustered the courage and chose to flee with her son in the late 1990s. It's uncertain if Kathy's departure triggered the worst aspects of the man's character to emerge. However, from this moment on, Peter unleashed a terrible side of himself upon the world, ready to cause much harm. Unfortunately, his path intersected with that of a lovely girl named Vicki Hamilton. Vicki was born in Scotland in 1976. She was the second child of Michael and Janet Hamilton, a married couple who had previously welcomed their firstborn daughter, Sharon. Later, Lee and Lindsay joined the family. Nevertheless, serious disagreements between the spouses led to divorce being the most appropriate decision. Vicki, Lee, and Lindsay stayed under their mother's care and moved to South London. The eldest daughter, Sharon, remained in Bathgate, but this distance didn't hinder Vicki and Sharon from maintaining their close relationship. When Vicki turned 15, Sharon saw it as a good opportunity for her sister to take a step towards independence, a desire many teenagers have. After traveling alone by bus to Scotland for a weekend visit, Vicki was supposed to return home to her mother's house. It marked her first solo trip by bus. Sharon viewed it as a small yet significant adventure. On Saturday, February 9, 1991, the sisters went shopping and engaged in continuous conversation. Sunday was typical, except that Vicki felt apprehensive about her return trip. The evening of February 10th was cold and snowy. Vicki ensured she had enough money for the fare and reviewed the bus route one last time with her sister before they hugged each other tightly. Standing at the bus stop, snacking on a bag of chips across from the police station, it was there Vicki's path crossed with Peter's fatefully. He forcibly dragged her into his car and committed unspeakable acts, raping her and then taking her life either out of malice or to prevent her from reporting him. Peter retained possession of the girl's purse. When Vicki did not arrive at her mother's house and there was no communication from her, her family began searching for her frantically in desperation. Simultaneously, they alerted the authorities about her absence. Once the police began investigating the disappearance, Vicki's face became one of the most recognizable in Scotland. The search operation grew into one of the largest in the country's history. Amidst this uproar, Peter opted to relocate to southeast England, specifically to Margate, where he settled into a charming house with a garden. There, Peter brought Vicki's lifeless body. He wrapped her remains in plastic and concealed them beneath a layer of concrete. He then covered everything with soil. Neighbors thought he had dug a sandbox for his young son, who was 3 years old at the time. Peter's name never surfaced during the initial investigation into Vicki's disappearance. The police found no leads on Vicki's whereabouts and considered her a likely runaway, viewing her as an unhappy teenager due to her parents' divorce. Their theory of voluntary disappearance was reinforced on February 21, 1991, when Vicki's purse was discovered near the main bus station in Edinburgh. Peter, always one step ahead of authorities, created this false lead and completely diverted the course of the investigation. Detectives spent 2 fruitless months searching in London. It is known that Vicki's mother died soon after. Over the next decade, Vicki's family and town residents continued to follow the case closely. But despite listing more than 7,000 names in the file, taking nearly 4,000 statements, and presenting about 500 documents along with 380 potential pieces of physical evidence, all efforts led to a dead end. The case was eventually shelved. The next young woman who encountered Peter was Dinah McNichol from Essex. She had a brother and 3 sisters. Her father was a jazz musician, and her mother had tragically died many years prior in a car accident. By age 18, Dinah was known as good-hearted and cheerful, a wonderful friend. She had just completed high school and held great hopes for her future. On one hand, she aimed to take a gap year for travel. On the other hand, she aspired to attend university. However, nothing was certain because although Dinah had applied to several institutions of higher education, she hadn't yet received any responses. During the first weekend of August 1991, Dinah attended a music festival in Hampshire. There, she met a young man named David Tremlett. Between dances, they discovered they liked each other. On Sunday, August 4th, they spent the night together in a tent. The following day, Dinah assisted him in dismantling the tent, and they agreed to hitchhike back home separately. However, since part of their route was the same, they decided to hitchhike together. Tired but happy, the young couple hit the road to catch a ride. That's when Peter appeared and offered them a lift. David got out of the car first, and Dinah wrote down his phone number before saying goodbye. Alone with the unknown driver, Dinah was about to experience a real nightmare. On that same Monday, August 5th, 1991, Peter repeated his previous crime as with Vicki. He used Dinah's scarf as a gag. After committing the crime, Peter withdrew money from Dinah's account at ATMs in Hampshire and Sussex. When her relatives noticed someone withdrawing money from her account, they immediately suspected something was wrong. Her family knew how carefully she saved every penny and what she planned to use that money for, either traveling or continuing her education. Days and weeks went by with no word from Dinah. The worst part for her family was living in uncertainty. Though unspoken aloud, everyone was sure something terrible had happened. After all, if Dinah were alive, she would have returned home or called to explain her absence. As for Peter, he left Margate without saying goodbye or explaining anything. Later in 1993, he settled in Hampshire, specifically in a rented apartment in Lee Park. He argued that he wanted to be closer to his son. On August 4th, 1993, 2 14-year-olds went to visit a local woman but found she wasn't home. They decided to ask other neighbors if they had seen her around. As a result, they knocked on Peter's door. The man saw a unique opportunity and invited them into his home to wait for the person they were looking for. They saw that the man's 5-year-old son was there, mistook him for a friendly person, and agreed to enter. There is another version about the reasons for this meeting, which suggests it was not accidental. The 2 girls came to Peter's home in response to a request for a babysitter that the man had made. They trusted him because when they arrived, they saw his son and stayed to look after him. Everyone agrees that when the child fell asleep, Peter tied them up, threatened them with a knife, and forced them to drink alcohol. He then beat and raped them, injuring one of the girls. Just when they thought their lives would end at the hands of this extremely cruel man, the boy woke up. This saved them from suffering the same fatal fate that befell Vicki and Dinah. In an effort to keep his son from realizing what had happened and understanding what kind of father he was, Peter decided to leave the apartment with the child. According to some reports, Peter left around 2 a.m., but before that he turned on the gas in the kitchen, hoping to complete his monstrous task. However, the girls regained consciousness and managed to escape. They went to the police and reported all the abuses committed by Peter, whom they described in detail. Peter returned his child to his mother and joined a religious sect called the Community of Jesus under a false name. He hoped to go unnoticed there, but in the meantime, police published his photograph, making his face widely known. Due to mass media coverage, information about this man started pouring in, and his car was also identified thanks to the BBC Crime Watch program. He was located and, after 40 days on the run, was captured in Brighton. He appeared in court on May 18, 1994, where he pleaded guilty to sexual assault and indecent acts against 2 young girls and was sentenced to 14 years in prison. However, Peter did not serve his full sentence and was released in 2004 at the age of 58. Immediately after his release from prison, he went back to Scotland, aiming to relocate from the area where he was registered as a sex offender. For a while, he managed to stay off the radar. Under a false name and posing as a homeless person, he knocked on the door of the Church of St. Patrick in Glasgow. To avoid being exposed, he adopted the name Pat McLaughlin. Dennis and Katie Curran, a married couple from the church's charitable group, recall that evening vividly when a homeless man sought shelter. Despite his vulnerable appearance, Katie had an uneasy feeling about him. Peter was brought up as a Catholic and soon felt at ease in this church. His apparent begging served as an effective disguise because it only aroused sympathy from parishioners, with few paying much attention to him. Consequently, he roamed freely around the church, an ideal hiding place for him. However, his predatory instincts stayed intact. Being in a sacred place held no significance for him. Calculating every move meticulously, Peter displayed eagerness to assist in church repairs. After about 6 or 7 weeks, he asked the priest if he could join the maintenance staff. At that time, people facing financial difficulties often sought refuge in churches. It was through such circumstances that Angelica Kluck crossed paths with Peter. Angelica was a 23-year-old woman from Poland who came to Scotland during the summer of 2006. She wanted to spend her summer break working to earn money and fund her language studies back home. She lived at the parish house of St. Patrick's Church, where she also worked as a cleaner. Peter took an immediate liking to her and somehow convinced her to help him with various tasks occasionally. On Sunday, September 24, 2006, Angelica spent several hours assisting him in painting a shed. Some parishioners noticed them together before Peter attacked her at the back of the chapel. Leah Brown, 47, and her husband Andrew, 46, who lived in a multi-story house overlooking the church, heard a woman scream through their open windows. In her statement afterward, Leah described it as a brief scream that sounded like someone being forcibly restrained. It was so eerie that it compelled her to get up from the couch and approach the window, but she saw nothing. The scream heard by the Browns coincided with the moment when Peter caught the young girl off guard as she stood with her back to him. He struck her forcefully and dragged her to the back of the chapel, where he continued to beat her. After she lost consciousness, he raped her and then inflicted several knife wounds. He hid the body in the basement under the floor near the confessional. At this point, Angelica was still alive. Several hours passed, and parishioners began to notice that the young girl was missing. That's when Dennis informed his wife, Katie, about Angelica's unusual disappearance. The police quickly initiated an investigation and started interviewing members of the community one by one. During these interviews, it came to light that Peter was the last person seen with Angelica, albeit disguised as Pat, a homeless laborer. Eventually, he became the prime suspect. Officers went to question him but found no evidence linking him directly to Angelica's disappearance. So they continued their investigation. Aware that it was only a matter of time before they discovered the body and traced everything back to him, Peter fled to London. By this time, Detective David Swindle had joined the investigation. He soon began to suspect that this case wasn't merely a disappearance. Based on their findings and collected testimonies, Detective Swindle believed it was unlikely Angelica would be found alive. Finally, on September 29, 2006, authorities discovered her body in the chapel. This news shocked British society due to both the nature of the crime and the location chosen by the perpetrator for hiding the body. Examining the girl's injuries led Detective David to suspect that this wasn't Peter's first crime. However, he didn't yet know how horrific and dangerous this individual turned out to be. Further revelations were inevitable. DNA found at the crime scene and on Angelica matched data in the United Kingdom's National Criminal Intelligence Database. That's when they learned exactly who they were dealing with. A man whose actions indicated deep-seated brutality and criminal sophistication. The individual they were looking for turned out to be Peter Tobin, whose fingerprints had been discovered at the crime scene. Consequently, the first step for the authorities was to publish his photograph in the media. His image was distributed nationwide, and the Scottish police reached out to the Metropolitan Police, initiating a search across the United Kingdom. Meanwhile, in London, Peter attempted to conceal himself by going to a hospital and pretending he had heart problems. He claimed he had chest pain and weakness on the left side of his body. Identifying himself as a plumber named James Kelly, he was examined by Dr. Nicholas. However, something about his demeanor and behavior raised concerns for the doctor. Initially avoiding eye contact, a behavior atypical of most patients, Peter became suspicious when tests failed to reveal any clear physical cause for his alleged pain. The doctor's suspicions were confirmed by a nurse who recognized Peter from a photograph that had been circulating in the media. As a result, both the nurse and doctor contacted the police. This phone call significantly altered the course of the investigation. On September 30th, police officer Alan Murray was dispatched to the hospital in London. Peter was taken into a room so Alan could speak with him. Immediately following this encounter, Peter was arrested. Although initially only charged with violating the sex offender registry, this approach allowed officers time to build a criminal case against him. Under Detective David's leadership, evidence gathered led to Peter's trial for crimes against Angelica in late March 2007. Despite substantial evidence against him, Peter denied committing violent acts against her, claiming instead they engaged in consensual sexual activity. He also denied providing false information to police and hospital staff. After 6 weeks of legal proceedings characterized by lies and manipulations on Peter's part, the truth finally prevailed. He was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment, but with the possibility of parole after 21 years. Detective David and his team were convinced that there was more to Peter's story. While the trial was ongoing, detectives delved into Peter's life. They gathered additional evidence and compiled a dossier. This was done with the involvement of various law enforcement agencies across the country. To avoid harming or interfering with Angelica's case, they preferred to conduct their work confidentially. The joint police operation was known as Anagram. Part of their work involved connecting missing persons cases to places where Peter had been. During these investigations, they established 2 precise links, one in Bathgate and another in Margate. Several weeks later, a search was conducted in Peter's old house on the coast. They found a knife with DNA samples hidden in the attic. However, there was nothing else there. Then they went to the house where Peter lived in Margate. There, it became clear they were dealing with a serious criminal offender. Investigators dug up a sandbox in the garden of the house, one that Peter had made for his son, and shockingly enough, they found a female body there. But that wasn't all. When they continued searching at the same location, they found another body. A woman's handbag was also discovered at the scene, which the team preserved for DNA analysis. Forensic experts worked diligently to establish the identities of the 2 victims, determine their ages, and estimate their dates of death. They also analyzed traces from the handbag. These genetic traces were very strong but initially yielded no matches in the National DNA Database. However, on June 1, 2007, there was a crucial breakthrough. The DNA matched Peter's fingerprint. This development proved monumental for investigators who deemed it necessary to move forward decisively in this direction. On August 14, 2007, authorities confirmed that one of the bodies found belonged to Vicki Hamilton, who disappeared at 15 years old during her first independent trip. Her family had been waiting for answers for 16 years. Later, It was announced that the second body belonged to 18-year-old Dinah McNichol, who was hitchhiking home after attending a concert. On September 1, 2008, the Crown Prosecution Service contacted Peter's lawyers and charged him with the murder of Vicki, leading to his trial. Officers had to restrain Vicki's father, Michael, after he saw Peter face to face. Michael later admitted he simply wanted Peter to know he was there to defend his daughter's name and protect her memory. After a month-long trial, on December 2, 2008, Peter was found guilty of Vicki's murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. The trial for Dinah took place in December 2009. On December 16th, after the defense failed to provide evidence exonerating their client, the jury found Peter guilty of Dinah's murder. He subsequently received his third life sentence. On November 22, 2007, it was reported that Tobin had been attacked by fellow inmates. He sustained minor injuries. Shortly before this incident, the serial killer had confessed to a total of 48 murders to a prison chaplain, though only 3 were ever proven. Recently, on October 8, 2022, Peter passed away in the hospital. Jersey Bridgeman was born on November 14, 2006, in the small town of Bentonville, Arkansas. When she was 3, her parents welcomed another daughter, but soon after, they decided to get a divorce. Even after the split, Jersey still spent a lot of time with her dad. He eventually remarried and had 2 more girls with his new wife. Since he lived just a short drive away in a nearby town, Jersey would often stay over at their place for a few days before going back to her mom. In 2012, when Jersey was 5, she and her mom moved to a new house in the same town. Jersey and her sister quickly made friends with the neighborhood kids, and her mom's best friend lived only a few yards away. Their families were so close they felt almost like one big extended family, and they spent a lot of time together. On November 19, 2012, less than a week after Jersey's birthday, her mom went to work her usual evening shift at the local supermarket. On nights like this, if her parents weren't available to watch the girls, Jersey's mom would sometimes leave them with her best friend. She didn't mind looking after them, especially since her own kids were friends with Jersey and her sister. That night, Jersey's mom finished her shift around 11:30 p.m., picked up the girls, and took them home to bed. Jersey fell asleep right away, but her younger sister wanted to sleep with her mom, so she took the girl along to her own room. The next morning, Jersey's mom woke up around 6:30 a.m. and went to get her daughter ready for school. But Jersey wasn't in her bedroom. The woman began searching the entire house and realized Jersey was nowhere to be found. Panicking, she called her own mother, telling her she couldn't find Jersey. Her mom suggested that maybe Jersey was playing hide and seek somewhere and told her to check closets and any other places she might fit in. Jersey's mom searched every corner of the house once again but couldn't find her. She looked outside and saw her friend sitting on her front porch. Hoping Jersey might have woken up early and gone over to her house to play, the mother asked if she'd seen her. Since Jersey spent a lot of time at their place, it seemed possible. But her friend hadn't seen Jersey and immediately started helping with the search. They checked around the neighborhood and her friend also looked inside her own house, but there was still no sign of Jersey. At this point, Jersey's mom was in full panic mode and decided to call the police immediately. Officers arrived within minutes and began their own search. They checked the house thoroughly to confirm Jersey wasn't there, then got permission from her friend to look through her house as well. Meanwhile, other officers started searching the nearby streets in case Jersey had somehow wandered off. During the search, they noticed a small vacant house next to Jersey's mother's property. The officers decided to check it, mainly because one of the doors was slightly open. After confirming that no one lived there, they quickly requested a search warrant. Investigators considered the possibility that Jersey might have gone inside, and a judge promptly granted them permission to enter the property. The officers searched each room but found no sign of Jersey until one of them decided to check a closet in the bedroom. What he found was truly horrifying. Inside was Jersey's body, and it only took one look to realize she was no longer alive. Her clothes were missing, and from what they could see, it appeared that the cause of death was strangulation. The body was handed over to medical examiners, and the police began their investigation. When they spoke with Jersey's mom, She mentioned that she left one of the front doors unlocked that night. She explained that she often did this because her boyfriend also worked night shifts and sometimes came by afterward to stay at her place. Since he didn't have a key, leaving the door unlocked meant he wouldn't have to wake her up. She added that he hadn't come over that night, and police immediately began considering him as a potential suspect. Since someone had taken Jersey to the abandoned house, it was likely she knew and trusted this person. Her mom's boyfriend got along well with Jersey and her younger sister. Whenever he was around, he spent a lot of time playing with the girls, and they both trusted him. While investigators looked into his whereabouts that night, they uncovered something else. About a year earlier, Jersey's biological father had faced some serious charges. In December 2011, Jersey was spending time at her father's house with his new wife. During her stay, a friend of the family was visiting, and one day, this person heard a child crying from behind a closed door. Curious and concerned, she opened the bedroom door to check what was going on. What she saw was truly shocking. Jersey was sitting there with a dog collar around her leg tied to a dresser. The room was a mess, cluttered with dirty clothes and other stuff. Horrified, she freed Jersey and immediately reported what she'd seen to the police. Officers quickly arrested Jersey's father and his wife. During questioning, they claimed they'd been tying Jersey up at night for her own safety, saying she'd sometimes sleepwalk and tried to grab some medications or even leave the house in the middle of the night. When asked why they didn't just use child gates, Jersey's father simply replied that they couldn't afford them. However, as the investigation continued, police found out that her father had been using drugs and somehow had enough money to buy them. He also wasn't working, despite the fact that he and his wife were raising 2 other children. Investigators spoke with Jersey, and she revealed the real reason they'd started tying her to the dresser. One night, she had gone into the kitchen and taken a few pieces of pie and some other snacks without permission. To punish the girl, her father and stepmother decided to tie her up. Jersey also told them that sometimes she was forced to sleep on the floor in the bedroom without even being allowed to use the bathroom. In the end, Jersey's father was sentenced to 18 years, and his wife received 12 years behind bars. Since then, Jersey had been living with her mother, who had no idea about all of this as Jersey had been too afraid to tell anyone. This story, for obvious reasons, caught the detectives' attention, but they quickly established that Jersey's father couldn't have been involved, as he had been in prison since his arrest and would not have been able to be at his daughter's home that night. Investigators then turned their attention to all known sex offenders living within a few miles. Each one provided an alibi, leading the police to focus on people in Jersey's close circle. Around this time, the medical examiners completed a preliminary report confirming that the cause of death was strangulation. They also found evidence of SA and collected biological material from the perpetrator. This sample was sent to the lab for DNA analysis, while detectives turned their attention to Jersey's mother's boyfriend. He claimed that he'd been working at a store that night and his shift didn't end until early in the morning. Police reviewed the store's CCTV footage, which backed up his claim. However, there was one problem. Detectives found that he had a break during his shift. Theoretically, he could have committed the crime, as the store was only a few minutes away from Jersey's home. But his coworkers told the police that he hadn't left the store during his break, so detectives eventually ruled him out as a suspect. While speaking with the police, the boyfriend mentioned an interesting detail. Around 3 a.m., a man named Zachary, Jersey's mother's neighbor and the husband of her best friend, had come into the store. Zachary said he had stomach pains, bought some medicine, and left. Given that the crime seemed to have been committed around this time, police found this account quite suspicious. They had already spoken to Zachary and his wife and had searched their home but didn't find any evidence. Initially, Zachary hadn't raised any suspicions, but with this new information about his late-night trip, detectives decided to question him again. Zachary confirmed that he did wake up in the middle of the night with stomach pain, and not finding any medication at home, he headed to a store just a few hundred yards away. When he got back, he eventually fell asleep again and woke up around 6:30 a.m. to get his older son ready for school. He also willingly provided police with his fingerprints, a DNA sample, and the clothes he wore to the store that night. Zachary insisted he would never harm Jersey, and the detectives believed he was telling the truth. While awaiting the DNA test results, the police decided to dig deeper into Zachary's background and uncovered a few intriguing details. First, they found that he had an extensive criminal record, though it was mainly for nonviolent, relatively minor offenses. Zachary also had a troubled past. Police learned that he had suffered various forms of abuse over the years from his family members, including his stepfather, biological mother, and brother. 13 reports had been filed by concerned people who noticed the abuse and wanted to help. It's unclear if the police ever took action. Detectives then spoke with Jersey's mother to learn more about Zachary. She shared that he and his wife often helped look after the kids, and he got along great with them. Jersey and her sister even called him Uncle Zach. He was practically family. The girls visited his house almost daily. The mother also mentioned that both Zachary and his wife had keys to her home. Since Jersey seemed to trust Zachary completely and would have followed him anywhere without question, detectives began to consider he might be involved. They also grew suspicious of his late-night store visit, thinking it could have been a calculated move to create an alibi with witnesses and CCTV footage. When detectives brought Zachary in for another interview, he suddenly said he wouldn't talk without his lawyer. This shift caught investigators off guard, especially since he'd been fully cooperative just recently, doing everything they'd asked. With no solid evidence against Zachary, all the investigators could do was wait for the DNA test results and keep searching for new leads. But then, out of nowhere, came an unexpected twist. Despite his initial refusal, Zachary called the police, saying he was now willing to take a polygraph test to clear his name. Detectives immediately set everything up, but the results weren't in Zachary's favor. The polygraph operator determined that many of his responses showed signs of deception. This only deepened detectives' suspicions, but they still needed concrete evidence. They also discovered that Zachary's decision to take the polygraph test was prompted by his wife, who had apparently started to doubt his honesty. It turned out she warned him that if he refused to cooperate with the police, she would take the children and leave him. So, this sudden change wasn't really about Zachary trying to clear his name after all. Soon after failing the polygraph, Zachary took another suspicious step. He posted on social media saying he had made a huge mistake that would ruin his life. To detectives, this seemed like further confirmation of his guilt, yet they still needed some solid proof to move forward. The lab results came back on November 26th, 6 days after the murder. This was also the day of Jersey's funeral, and Zachary, along with his wife, planned to attend it. Forensic experts had extracted a DNA profile from the biological material found on the victim's body and analyzed all of Zachary's clothing. The results didn't surprise detectives. Nearly all of Zachary's clothes contained traces of Jersey's DNA, and the biological material on her body matched his DNA as well. With this crucial evidence, detectives obtained a warrant for his arrest and detained him right outside the church, just as the ceremony was about to begin. During the interrogation, Zachary continued to deny his involvement, saying he had nothing to do with it. But when detectives told him about the lab results, he ultimately confessed to the crime. According to his story, Zachary really did wake up with a stomach ache that night and went looking for medicine but couldn't find any at home. So he decided to drop by Jersey's mom's place. For him and his wife, this wasn't unusual. They would often stop by to borrow medicine from her cabinet. Besides, Zachary knew she usually left one of the doors unlocked, so he wouldn't even need to wake her up. Once inside, he noticed that Jersey's bedroom door was slightly open and decided to go in. According to Zachary, he had no clear motive and insisted he didn't understand why he went in there. He woke Jersey up and asked her to come with him. Trusting him like family, Jersey didn't hesitate and followed. Zachary led her to an abandoned house nearby, where he committed his monstrous crime and left her body in a closet. Afterward, he walked to a store, bought some stomach medicine, and went home, where he was able to fall asleep without a care. The next morning, he joined the search for Jersey as if nothing had happened, pretending he was just worried and eager to help find her. Zachary also claimed he hadn't planned the crime and said it all happened on impulse, though detectives had doubts about that. Still, they had no reason to question the rest of his confession. He provided many highly accurate details that hadn't been made public. At that point, The police had kept almost all information under wraps, even from Jersey's mother, so there was no way Zachary could have known those specifics otherwise. In the end, he was charged with murder and held in jail awaiting trial. The prosecution announced they would seek the death penalty. As for his attorney, he didn't even try to argue Zachary's innocence. Given the confession and overwhelming evidence, it seemed like a lost cause. Instead, his focus was on getting a life sentence instead of the death penalty. It's worth mentioning that soon after Zachary was put in jail, another inmate attacked him. He wasn't seriously injured though, and since then, he's been under increased protection. The trial began in the spring of 2015, 2.5 years after the murder. Since Zachary never recanted his confession, proceedings moved very quickly. He was found guilty and sentenced to death, with 2 additional life sentences and an extra 20 years. Before the sentencing, Zachary spoke to Jersey's family, expressing deep regret for what he'd done and hoping they might one day forgive him. However, his apology didn't seem to have much effect on them. As often happens, executions are almost always delayed for many years, and Zachary's case was no exception. He made several attempts to appeal his sentence, initially claiming that his first lawyer hadn't even tried to exclude certain pieces of evidence and that the jury selection process had been flawed. His new attorney also argued that Zachary suffered from severe mental health issues and developmental delays. They claimed his mental capacity was equivalent to that of an 8-year-old, meaning he shouldn't be held fully responsible for his actions. Interestingly, even Zachary's own mother, who had mistreated him for years, came forward in his defense. In an interview, she said she still loved her son and hoped his lawyers could overturn his sentence. Zachary's wife, who was also the best friend of Jersey's mother, supported his appeal as well, even though she had previously condemned his actions. But despite these efforts, the appeal was denied. Independent experts concluded that, while Zachary did show developmental challenges, he was fully capable of understanding his actions and knew he was committing a serious crime. Currently, Zachary remains in prison, still trying to appeal his sentence. The last developments in his case were in early 2024, but his lawyers have yet to convince the court to overturn the death penalty, and it seems unlikely that the situation will ever change. As for Jersey's mother, she eventually married the man she was dating at the time of the tragedy, and they had a daughter together. She regrets that this little girl will never get to know Jersey or experience what a wonderful older sister she could have been. On May 25, 2009, an emergency call was to the services in Portland, USA, reporting a fire. When the fire was extinguished and firefighters the building, they discovered a horrifying scene. The room was surrounded by crosses and other religious objects. There lay a completely charred body. However, the most terrifying part was that the corpse was headless. Zoe Sarnacki was born on March 25, 1991 in Portland, located in Cumberland County, Maine, in the northwestern United States. She grew up with her loving parents John and Linda Sarnacki, her older brother Gregory, and 2 half-sisters from her father's side. Zoe always maintained good relationships with them. John Sarnacki was a builder, and thanks to his job, he supported the family well. From an early age, Zoe was surrounded by creative stimuli and showed a strong inclination towards art. She also loved animals and had 5 cats at home. As Zoe grew older, she became increasingly restless and curious. The idea of traveling and experiencing other cultures fascinated her. She also started following a vegan diet, consuming only vegetables while avoiding meat and animal products. This lifestyle included an ecological culture of protecting animals, the environment, and health. In 2005, Zoe started attending high school where she had a large group of friends who described her as a happy, joyful, and positive girl. In 2008, on her 17th birthday, surprised everyone with a decision that her parents did not like. She dropped out of school. Ken Coonan, the principal of the school Zoe attended, said that the girl refused to talk and discuss why she did not want to finish her junior year. Ken remembered Zoe as very nice and, according to him, her classmates spoke highly of her. He added that she interacted a lot with other energetic and creative young people like herself. A few months after Zoe dropped out of school, she began working at a local bakery and coffee shop named Bagelworks. On March 25, 2009, her 18th birthday, she eagerly awaited getting a tattoo on one of her arms. Zoe had always admired the Austrian artist Gustav Klimt's work, and when it came time to choose a tattoo design, she was inspired by his artistry. Little did she know that this decision, intended to mark her transition into adulthood, would introduce her to someone who would profoundly impact her future. Zoe knew exactly what she wanted on her arm, so she headed to a tattoo parlor in the Old Port area. There she met Chad Gurney, a 27-year-old tattoo artist. They seemed to connect instantly. A few days after their initial meeting, Zoe agreed to be Chad's girlfriend. The 9-year age difference didn't bother her at all. Chad was indeed a distinctive individual. He attended high school in Wells, Maine, where he made a name for himself as a lacrosse goalie, a sport involving two teams using small rubber balls and long-handled sticks. After high school, Chad moved to Lynchburg, Virginia to study at Liberty University. This institution is well known for being led by the famous evangelist, Pastor Jerry Falwell. Chad's body was adorned with numerous tattoos, each telling its own story. His skin featured dozens of drawings, most depicting aliens. One particularly striking piece was a gray-toned crocodile. In the realm of tattoos, alien imagery can signify two things: a belief in extraterrestrial beings or a reflection of the wearer's sense of individuality, indicating they don't fit into this world but are unique and original. The reptile tattoo symbolized danger and hostility, a predator best avoided. In addition to his love for tattoos, Chad was also passionate about underground and alternative dance forms, known as hardcore dance. This genre involves intense and sometimes aggressive movements, but requires complete bodily control. It's not about self-harm. It's about releasing energy through various physical expressions like lunges, jumps, and acrobatic stunts that few dare to try. Those who knew Chad mentioned his struggle with recovering from a severe car accident 4 years prior before his move to Portland in 2005. His resilience painted him as both intriguing and complex, a man marked by his past, yet continuously moving forward towards new experiences. Chad suffered significant injuries in Alabama when the Liberty team was on their way to lacrosse game. Local van carrying both players and coaches was rear-ended by a car and forced into oncoming traffic where it collided with a large truck. The severe impact ejected Chad from the vehicle, leading to a near loss of his leg and necessitating approximately 20 surgeries. Due to a strong head injury, Chad underwent psychiatric evaluation, which revealed he had cognitive impairments affecting his speech, memory, and mathematical thinking. Chad gained financial independence through the 7-figure sum he received from a lawsuit following the accident. 2 years later, in 2007, he sought treatment for anxiety and depression, eventually being diagnosed with both an organic personality disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. In 2009, Chad traveled alone to Hawaii with plans to continue exploring the world. This passion for travel and curiosity about other cultures led him to meet Zoe. The couple adopted a relaxed and unconventional approach to their relationship. After they began dating, Zoe and Chad agreed on an open relationship, allowing them to see other people. In May 2009, Chad traveled again, this time for a weekend in Vancouver, Canada. Upon his return to Portland, Zoe admitted that she had been with another man during his absence and allegedly had sexual relations. Initially, it appeared that Chad was untroubled by this incident of infidelity due to their open relationship agreement. However, following this confession, Chad began insisting that Zoe quit her job and join him on a personal spiritual quest in Thailand. She declined his proposal without suspecting the grave outcome it could have. On May 25, 2009, Zoe visited Chad's apartment feeling very tired and decided to take a nap. While she was asleep, Chad grabbed her by the neck, struck her on the head, and strangled her until she ceased breathing. Then he engaged in sexual activity with Zoe's lifeless body before decapitating her, according to records. After committing the heinous crime, Chad took a shower, got dressed, and drove to the nearest gas station, where he filled a canister with gasoline. He returned to his apartment and doused Zoe's body on the lower floor with gasoline, laying a trail to the front door before igniting the fire. Chad took a backpack he had packed for a trip to Thailand, along with a laptop and shotgun. When the apartment caught fire, he went to an ATM, withdrew cash, and checked into the Old Orchard Beach Motel. There, he got into a jacuzzi and waited. Meanwhile, a call was made to 911 emergency services about the fire. Authorities responded immediately and were able to extinguish the flames. Upon entering the building, they were confronted with a horrific scene. Among the ashes lay a charred corpse surrounded by crosses and other religious items. A neighbor quickly called Chad to inform him that his house had burned down. The young man replied that he wasn't in town as he had gone to his hometown of Lewiston, and then quickly hung up the phone. On Tuesday, May 26th, Chad spoke with his best friend and confessed that he had killed Zoe. While explaining what happened, he seemed calm and rational. Chad said he was tired of the pain and couldn't restrain himself anymore. As he talked to his friend, he drove through the streets of Portland and carelessly ran a red light. A nearby city police officer stopped him. Chad insisted that his friend explain over the phone to the officer who had pulled him over that Chad had been in an accident in 2005, which might have caused mental health issues. After this interaction with the officer and talking to his friend, Chad went to the police and confessed to Zoe's murder. The police confiscated Chad's belongings, and on his computer's hard drive, a computer crimes investigator found a video recording labeled, "Woman half decapitated for suspected infidelity. At least if she cheated, she won't do it again." This evidence was later admitted in court on Wednesday, May 27th. At the high school where Zoe had studied, her memory was honored with a moment of silence during classes. Teachers and students were informed about the incident during lunch. That same day, a room was set up in the school where social workers and counselors were available for grieving students. After some time, Christine Koo, Zoe's stepsister, made the first statement on behalf of the family. She told local media journalists that she wanted the public to know this was an unusual murder, because Chad had committed many evil acts. According to Christine, detectives told her that in a rage, Chad had attacked Zoe, sexually violated her body, and set it on fire. Then he calmly went to a motel and got into a jacuzzi. A week after Zoe's murder, on Tuesday, June 2nd, 2009, a vigil was held in front of the apartment building where Chad had lived. It was a moment of consolation for Zoe's friends and family. Many strangers shocked and outraged by the brutal crime also attended. Estimates suggest that over 150 people gathered to pray and remember Zoe. They also placed candles and flowers on the steps of the building where her life was tragically cut short. Zoe's father J.N. and her stepsister Courtney came to the scene of the tragedy and were touched by the support of so many people. Meanwhile, the police began interviewing Chad's friends and acquaintances, who agreed that the young man had a split personality. According to them, he sometimes portrayed himself as a person on a spiritual quest, with religious artifacts throughout his apartment and plans to travel to Thailand to study Eastern religions. Some said that Chad was kind and charming, often giving people small gifts. They mentioned that he often spoke of wanting to use money he received from an accident for the good of humanity. At the same time, Chad enjoyed his image as a tough guy with tattoos covering his arms and provocative confrontational behavior. Robert Collins, a 24-year-old chef, noticed something peculiar about Chad. When Chad attended parties, people often shrugged and turned away. Robert recalled Chad once confiding in him that the only thing he identified with was pain. He even remembered that Chad had this word tattooed on his knuckles. Police and prosecution made significant efforts to gather information about the brutal crime. Deputy Attorney General Bill Stokes reported that the judge had ordered the seizure of court documents. Steve Weir, who rented an apartment from Chad in 2006, was also questioned. He mentioned seeing religious paintings and artifacts in Chad's apartment and said Chad expressed an interest in theology but did not practice it. Watson Atkinson, owner of another tattoo parlor in Portland, shared that Chad once confessed he wanted to use his accident compensation to find himself. Watson added that Chad seemed overly focused on teenage girls. This concerned him so much that he forbade his 16-year-old daughter from interacting with Chad. Watson also noted that none of Chad's close acquaintances could have imagined how dark his thoughts were. During the initial investigation, Chad's prior medical history and mental health diagnoses were revealed. However, while in custody, several psychologists evaluated Chad and found no evidence of delusions or hallucinations. In conversations with specialists, Chad admitted having strong feelings regarding Zoe's infidelity and expressed disappointment over it. According to court documents, he claimed to be weary of the infidelity of all his girlfriends. These conversations revealed a depressed individual who began contemplating taking Zoe's life after she confessed her unfaithfulness to him. Chad told 3 different psychologists that he engaged in sexual acts with her remains because he believed he had already committed a terrible act and was contemplating what worst thing he could do next. When his trial began, a 127-minute police interrogation conducted 12 hours after the crime was leaked. During the interrogation with Detective Danham, Chad said that he and Zoe got along very well. He noted that she occasionally stayed in his apartment for about a week and that they had no arguments. Chad claimed they were soulmates and that she always tried to be honest with him. He stated that he had taken the life of the most beautiful girl he ever knew and added that he owed it to his 18-year-old victim to tell the truth. During the conversation with the detective, Chad remained composed, constantly apologized, and cried several times. Chad recounted that on May 25, 2009, Zoe was napping. According to him, he approached and began to strangle her. She tried to fight for her life and screamed for him to stop. Chad said that when Zoe tried to resist, he hit her on the head and continued to strangle her until she stopped breathing. He then described the atrocities he committed with her body. At this point in the interrogation, Chad stated that he used 3 knives, not a samurai sword as initially thought, for the decapitation. He added that he then placed a cross between her legs and talked about everything he did while her body burned in the apartment. Describing the events, Chad constantly called himself a terrible person. When asked why he decapitated Zoe, he replied that he was trying to turn her death into a ritual of forgiveness. When asked why he did it, Chad struggled to find an answer. He then stated that he felt possessed and that on the day of Zoe's murder, everything in his life dimmed. He explained that for several hours he became a wild, primitive beast in his basic instincts, and that's why he committed such a monstrous act. This interrogation became an important piece of evidence presented in Cumberland County Supreme Court during the initial hearings. Prosecutors played the entire 2.5-hour recording for Judge Roland Cole. There was discussion that Chad faced a minimum of 25 years in prison and a maximum of life imprisonment. During one of the hearings in 2011, it was proposed that acknowledging his mental disorder could result in his transfer to a psychiatric center in Austria. It was established that the accused had strangled the victim in a fit of anger. However, it remained uncertain whether Chad, who waived his right to a jury trial, agreed with this at the time. Pruers argued that the former Liberty University student and lacrosse champion was fully aware of his actions. They brought in a psychiatrist and psychologist to testify about Chad's mental state. All of them concluded that the young man knew what he was doing and understood his decision to brutally kill his girlfriend. The defense, however, continued to emphasize Chad's mental health issues, arguing that he was ashamed and afraid of losing control over himself. On January 11, 2012, Chad's attorney tried to convince the Supreme Court to dismiss evidence found on his client's personal computer at the time of arrest. This evidence included a gruesome video where Chad explained how to decapitate an unfaithful woman. The defense contended that this video should not have been admitted into evidence. In March 2012, nearly 3 years after the egregious crime, 30-year-old Chad Gurney was sentenced to 50 years for the murder of Zoe Sarnacki and 25 years for arson. The judge ordered these sentences be served consecutively. Chad's lawyers filed an appeal against the sentence, but it was rejected. Zoe's family had hoped for a life sentence. During sentencing, the presiding judge stated it was clear that the defendant did not perceive reality normally. However, the issue was whether he understood his actions were wrong. Sarah Churchill, Chad's attorney, argued before the Supreme Court that brain concussions and other injuries from a 2005 accident left her client in a constant state of delusion. She claimed the judge erred by finding Chad guilty because the search warrant should not have extended to his smartphone, laptop, and social media pages. Churchill argued that instead of considering evidence from these devices, Significant weight should have been given to evidence regarding Chad's side psychosis and alienation at the time of the crime. The Deputy Attorney General countered by stating that Chad killed Zoe in retaliation for her infidelity, which he deemed dishonored as betrayal. The deputy noted that no information from social networks was used against Chad and concluded there was overwhelming evidence proving he knew what he did during the crime. Afterward, Zoe's aunt, Kathy Kozev, told journalists she felt breathless seeing and hearing him during trial, recalling her niece's agonizing final moments vividly. Christy Wesselman was born on April 19, 1970 in Glen Ellen, Illinois. She lived there with her mom, 2 older brothers, and a sister. Their town was considered one of the safest in the area, and Christy loved spending time outside. She'd spend hours wandering the streets with other kids from the neighborhood. At school, Christy was popular and had a lot of friends. She was actively involved in school life and even got elected as vice president of her class. On top of that, she played volleyball and softball. In the summer of 1985, 15-year-old Christy was taking summer classes at school and spent most of her free time hanging out with friends. On July 21st, Christy came home from school around 3:30 p.m. Right after getting home, she decided to walk to a local store to grab a soda and a chocolate bar for herself and her mom. Her mother expected her back in just a few minutes since the store was close by. But as time went on, it became clear something was wrong, because Christy wasn't coming home. At first, her mom thought she might have run into some friends and gone off with them. Back then, there were no cell phones, so she couldn't check in with Christy and had no choice but to wait. As evening set in, her worry only grew. She called Christy's friends, but none of them had seen her that day. Growing desperate, she headed to the store herself, scanning the streets along the way, but there was no sign of Christy anywhere. Christy's family spent the next several hours searching for her, but when there was still no sign of her by 1:50 a.m., her mother decided to contact the police. Officers quickly joined the search, starting by piecing together Christy's last known movements. First, they spoke with the clerk at the store she'd visited. The man knew Christy well. He lived nearby and had even babysat her when she was younger. He confirmed that Christy had come by around 4 p.m., picked up some chocolate bars, and left. She didn't mention where she was headed, but the clerk noted that she seemed happy and nothing about her behavior struck him as unusual. Police also found a few other witnesses who had seen Christy at the store, but none of them could recall where she went after that. Investigators spoke to all of Christy's friends, considering the possibility that she might have lost track of time while hanging out with some of them. But none of her friends had seen her that day. The police then focused all their resources on the search and began combing through the streets. But by that time, it was already the middle of the night, making the search even more challenging. Despite their determination, there was no trace of Christy. No clues, no leads, nothing. The search continued through the early morning, and by midday, a new group of officers took over. One of them suggested trying to retrace Christy's likely route. He guessed that she had probably taken the shortest path from her house to the store, a shortcut through a nearby field. Back then, there was a large vacant lot with tall grass between the residential area and the store. Walking around it would take quite a bit of time. For adults driving cars, it wasn't an issue, but local kids who frequented the store or the nearby McDonald's always took a shortcut through the field, where a narrow path had been worn into the grass. The detective decided to follow this trail. As he made his way along it, something unusual caught his eye in the grass. Pushing through the overgrowth, he realized it was a human body, and he quickly recognized Christy. He immediately called for backup, and the body was handed over to the medical examiners for further analysis. Forensic specialists combed through the crime scene for any evidence, but their search came up empty. No footprints, no personal belongings, nothing to help explain what had happened. The medical examiners determined that Christy had died from 8 stab wounds. They also found evidence of SA and collected the perpetrator's biological material. But in 1985, DNA testing was still in its infancy and not commonly used in criminal investigations. So with no way to analyze it, the sample was stored for future use. Christy's mother also helped police piece together another interesting detail. Christy had been wearing a pearl ring on her finger that day. However, the ring was nowhere to be found, neither on her body nor at the crime scene. Detectives concluded that the killer might have taken it and instructed all officers to keep an eye on pawn shops in case the murderer tried to sell it. With no physical evidence to work with, the police focused on finding potential witnesses who might have seen Christy or the killer near the field. They managed to track down several people who had used the same path around the estimated time of the murder, but none of them reported seeing anything suspicious. It was quite weird because Christy's body was just a few yards off the trail, although it was hidden by the tall grass, making it nearly impossible to spot. Investigators also learned that just a few dozen yards from where Christy's body was found, a family had been hosting a barbecue in their backyard. But despite being so close to the scene, none of them remembered hearing or seeing anything out of the ordinary. An employee at a gas station about 60 yards from the field also worked his entire shift that day, but didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. To the police, the situation seemed bizarre. So many people had been near the crime scene, yet no one saw or heard anything. Investigators theorized that the unknown attacker either followed Christy from the store to the field or encountered her on the path. He likely led her just a few yards into the tall grass and killed her, all without making a sound. Detectives considered the possibility that Christy might have known her killer, which could explain why there were no screams. After all, their town was small and many residents knew each other. Police began investigating all the men who knew Christy, but this effort led nowhere. They also compiled a list of men in the area with prior convictions for violent crimes. Several suspects were reviewed, but none of them could be tied to the murder. For several months, the police made little progress in solving the mystery. They continued following up on tips and investigating new suspects, but every lead brought them to a dead end. This dragged on for 3 long years, until an unexpected breakthrough came in 1988. By that time, DNA analysis was becoming a key tool in criminal investigations. Detectives decided to collect DNA samples from everyone who had been a potential suspect in Christy's case over the years. Many agreed to cooperate, and none of their samples matched the biological evidence found at the scene. But there was one person who refused to provide a DNA sample. Dana Henry, a 34-year-old man living near the field where Christy was found, had been on the police's radar from the first days of the investigation. At the time, Henry denied having anything to do with the crime. But now, his refusal to give a sample made detectives seriously question his innocence. The police decided to seek a court order to obtain his DNA. Henry appeared at the court hearing and continued to insist he was innocent. However, he was charged with contempt of court and held in a local jail cell for several days. Only after that, Henry agreed to provide his DNA sample. In the end, his DNA didn't match the killer's sample and Henry was released. Once he was out, he told reporters that he had been held in a jail cell without clothing and was only released after he gave in to the immense pressure and reluctantly agreed to provide a sample. Henry said he spent around $50,000 on legal fees, a significant amount of money at the time. He had to mortgage his home, which he eventually lost, and many of his friends and family turned their backs on him. Frustrated and angry, Henry filed a lawsuit against the police department, but it didn't seem to lead anywhere. Even after DNA evidence cleared his name, some people still believed he was guilty. Years later, Henry admitted to reporters that the whole ordeal had ruined his life, even though he was never formally charged with a crime. For another year, Christy's case remained at a standstill until 1989, when an unexpected twist brought it back into the spotlight. A judge issued a restraining order against a local man who had been bombarding the victim's family with tips about who he believed was responsible for Christy's murder. The man, named Willis, first contacted Christy's relatives in late 1985. He claimed to have information about the killer's identity and started sending them various leads. Each tip was investigated by the police, but every time it turned out to be either far-fetched or completely irrelevant to the case. This dragged on for almost 4 years until Christy's family couldn't take it anymore. They filed a complaint and a judge issued an order barring Willis from ever contacting them again. Following the restraining order, police decided to investigate Willis himself, but they found no evidence linking him to the crime. The killer's DNA was uploaded to the FBI database, but no matches were found. The case remained cold for many years. From time to time, the police revisited it, following up on tips, but they never got any closer to catching the killer. This went on for 3 entire decades. Over the years, the original detectives had all retired or moved on, and Christie's case had been assigned to a new team. Then, in 2015, something completely unexpected happened. One day, they got a notification from the FBI database. The DNA sample from Christie's killer perfectly matched a recently uploaded profile. The DNA belonged to a 62-year-old man named Michael Jones, who lived in a small town called Champaign, about 150 miles from Christie's home. Jones' DNA was added to the database after he was arrested for domestic violence. His wife had reported him to the police, which led to his arrest. According to an Illinois law passed in 2002, anyone suspected of a crime has to provide a DNA sample. Interestingly, the main advocate for this law was the state's attorney from the same county where Christie's murder took place, and this particular unsolved case had been a major factor in his push to get this legislation passed. As soon as the DNA match came through, investigators jumped into action, looking into Michael Jones. The first thing that stood out was that his name had never been mentioned in the case before. He wasn't a suspect, a witness, or even someone remotely connected to the investigation. The detectives simply hadn't known he existed. Michael Jones had a long criminal history. His first run-in with the law came in the mid-70s when he assaulted a woman. But for some unknown reason, he apparently avoided any real consequences. Just a year later, Jones attacked a 27-year-old woman, assaulted her, and left her in a hospital parking lot. When police issued a warrant for his arrest, Michael turned himself in. During his trial, he expressed deep regret for his actions and claimed he had a great respect for the law. That's why he surrendered voluntarily. Jones also insisted that he suffered from serious mental health issues and needed professional help. However, an independent psychiatrist determined that he was fully aware of his actions. As a result, Jones was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. As you might have guessed, Michael was released early for good behavior. He ended up serving just 6 years of his sentence and was back on the streets by 1983, 2 years before Christie's murder. What's even more striking is that his victim wasn't informed of his early release. Later, she stated that had she known, she would have done everything in her power to challenge the decision. A year after his release, Michael got married, but in 1994, his first wife left him and secured a restraining order against him. The reason? He had been showing an unhealthy interest in one of her young relatives. But despite this alarming behavior, no formal charges were ever filed. In 1999, Michael was arrested again, this time for assaulting a family member of his new girlfriend. Detectives also learned that Michael often went on long solo motorcycle trips and frequently visited relatives in Chicago. Given that Christie's town was on the outskirts of his route, it's possible he passed through the area while traveling to see his family. If that was the case, it would explain why he never appeared on the detectives' radar. If Michael was just passing through for a few hours, tracking his presence would have been nearly impossible. Christie's mother said she had never heard his name before. When police first called her to ask about Michael, she didn't think much of it. Over the past 30 years, investigators had contacted her many times with questions, so this just felt like another routine inquiry. But everything changed when police obtained a fresh DNA sample from Michael while he was in prison and confirmed once and for all that he was the killer. They visited Christie's mother in person to deliver the news. After all these years, the man responsible for her daughter's murder had finally been caught. Before formally charging Michael with Christie's murder, detectives spoke with his ex-girlfriend and uncovered more details about him. She described Michael as someone with a volatile temperament. He could be calm one moment and then suddenly fly into a rage for no apparent reason. She also mentioned that he was obsessed with detective books and crime shows on TV. This information led investigators to suspect that Michael might not just be responsible for Christie's murder, but potentially other unsolved crimes as well. His frequent solo trips, criminal tendencies, and fascination with crime stories hinted that he might have known how to cover his tracks and avoid leaving evidence behind. After building their case against Michael, Police officially charged him on September 18, 2015, and Michael denied any involvement in Christy's murder. The case eventually went to court, but the wait dragged on for 3 long years. The trial didn't start until 2018. Prosecutors sought a life sentence, but in the end, Michael decided to plead guilty in exchange for a lighter sentence. As part of the deal, he wasn't required to reveal any details about the crime, but with the DNA evidence, there was no question about his guilt. As a result, the judge sentenced him to 80 years in prison with a possibility of parole no earlier than 2095. In other words, Michael will likely never walk free again. Christy's family thanked the investigators for finally bringing the case to a close. Christy's mother also expressed her frustration over Michael's early release in 1983. She pointed out that if he had served his full 10-year sentence, he wouldn't have had the chance to attack her daughter, and Christy would still be alive today. Henry, the man initially suspected of the crime, also attended the trial of the real killer. In a later interview, he shared that the accusations had ruined his life, and even decades later, he still hadn't fully recovered. He hoped that seeing justice served would help him heal, but it didn't. Henry also revealed that throughout all these years, no one from the police department ever apologized to him, let alone faced any consequences for the damage they had caused to his life. Annie Tahan, a 24-year-old young mother, vanished mysterious circumstances. According to her partner, she abruptly left him and their newborn daughter without any explanation for her departure. The search for Annie extended over 4 years, with ongoing efforts to locate her, but no immediate results. Annie Tahan, born on May 1, 1965, was raised by her mother. She had a love for, enjoyed dancing and fun activities, and cherished simple joys. Annie always dreamed of having a large family and saw motherhood as her primary goal in life. She embraced this role early, welcoming her first son Jimmy at the age of 18, and then her second son Sean just a year later. By the age of 20, she had also given birth to her third child, a daughter named Shane. Tragically, shortly after Shane's birth, the children's father decided not to participate in their upbringing and left the family. This abandonment left Annie facing the challenges of being a single parent to 3 young children while living in a rented apartment in Maine. In 1987, when Shane was just 6 months old and Annie was 22 years old, she met Michael Palin. He was a 32-year-old Navy petty officer serving on the aircraft carrier Bramby. Their paths crossed in Portland, Maine, where Michael's ship was docked. Michael quickly became taken with Annie during an encounter at the waterfront. Living in Charleston, South Carolina, Michael was highly respected in the Navy for his work as a computer systems operator. He actively dissipated in military operations and had been recognized with several awards. Annie found herself deeply attracted to Michael's naval career and soon fell in love with him. She confided to a friend that she believed she had found a man worthy of her love. After dating for several months and developing their relationship further, Annie and Michael decided to live together as a family unit, along with her 2 sons and daughter. However, their shared life took an unfortunate turn when a fire broke out in their apartment. At that time, Annie wasn't home. Michael was alone with the children. While Michael managed to escape along with Jimmy and Sean, who could walk, Shane, being too young, sadly didn't make it out alive. After returning, Annie tried to go back into the burning apartment to rescue Shane. However, neighbors restrained her. The loss of Shane due to the fire left a significant impact on Annie. She shared that this tragic event created an irreplaceable void in her heart. As authorities started investigating the fire, experts faced difficulties in determining the exact cause of ignition. The circumstances were highly suspicious to investigators. Even with these suspicions, the investigation concluded without assigning responsibility to any individual. Following the devastating fire, Annie Tahan moved with her sons to her mother's residence in Portland. Meanwhile, Michael Palin immersed himself in work and chose to live in the barracks. A few months later, another alarming incident happened near Annie's mother's house. A shed in the backyard caught fire. Investigators quickly identified the fire's origin and discovered a lighter engraved with Bramby, the name of Michael Palin's ship. This evidence pointed toward Michael as a prime suspect. Despite this suggestive evidence, police couldn't conclusively prove his involvement because of insufficient proof. After this second fire incident, child welfare authorities in Maine determined that Annie Tahan's sons were in a potentially dangerous situation under her care. Consequently, they decided to remove Jamie and Sean from their mother's custody and place them under foster care administered by social services. This decision left Annie devastated as she fervently tried to regain custody of her children. Despite all her efforts, she couldn't do so, inflicting profound emotional distress and leaving her heartbroken over being separated from her sons. When Michael's ship returned to Charleston, South Carolina, he rented an apartment and reconnected with Annie despite their tumultuous past. Annie agreed to communicate with him and eventually moved in with him to Goose Creek, a suburb of Charleston, where they lived as a couple. However, Annie's stay was soon marred by a startling discovery. She found a photograph of Michael wearing a wedding ring, revealing his marital status. Confronted with the photograph, Michael admitted to Annie that he was married but had been long divorced. He disclosed that his ex-wife Dawn Breeze and their 3 children resided in his mother's house in Savannah, Georgia. Despite Michael's reassurances of no ongoing relationship with Dawn, Annie was shaken by the revelation. She contemplated leaving him but ultimately decided to stay, still seeing Michael as an ideal partner for starting a family. Their cohabitation, however, soon turned sour. Michael's behavior towards Annie grew increasingly hostile and demeaning. Annie, planning to return to her mother's house, discovered she was pregnant. This news led her to reconsider her plans to leave, filled with the joy of expecting another child. In October 1989, a month before her disappearance, Annie gave birth to her 4th daughter, Jade. Though Annie knew Jade could never replace her lost daughter, she felt Jade filled a significant void in her heart. Yet in the month following Jade's birth, Michael's treatment of deteriorated further. He resorted to openly insulting and humiliating her. Annie confided in a friend about her fear of Michael's relentless pursuit if she attempted to flee. Michael's controlling behavior escalated. He confined Annie to their apartment while he was at work, disconnecting the phone and placing it in his briefcase. Annie was increasingly alarmed by Michael's actions. Just 2 days before her vanishing act, in a state of distress, Annie reached out to a close friend, Katie French, via phone call. In the call, Annie revealed to Katie that she had disclosed her intention to leave Michael. However, Michael had retorted that if she left, their daughter Jade would remain with him. Annie found herself in a desperate situation, overwhelmed with emotion. She urgently pleaded with Katie to come immediately and rescue both her and her daughter Jade. Unfortunately, Katie was preoccupied and could not come to her aid. Instead, she sent Annie money for a bus ticket, hoping it would enable her to escape and return to Portland. Unbeknownst to them, this heartfelt conversation would be their last exchange. 2 days later, on November 7th, 1989, Katie attempted to contact Annie but received no response. Several days passed before Michael Palin informed Katie that on November 6th, Annie had gathered her belongings and departed in an unknown direction. Expecting Annie to reach out from her new location, Katie waited anxiously. However, 2 weeks went by with no word. By Thanksgiving on November 24th, Annie had been unreachable for 20 days. Growing increasingly concerned, Katie contacted all of Annie's friends and acquaintances, but found that no one had any information about her whereabouts. She then tried to report 24-year-old Annie as missing to the police, but was informed that she could not file an official report since she was not a blood relative. Months passed without any sign of Annie. Eventually, Katie obtained the phone number of Michael Palin's mother. Upon contacting her, Katie was shocked to learn that Jade was in her care. This revelation confirmed Katie's worst fears. She knew Annie would never leave her daughter behind willingly. Despite the concerning developments, Michael Palin displayed a notable lack of concern regarding Annie's disappearance. He made no apparent efforts to engage with law enforcement or initiate a search for her whereabouts, and soon received a transfer to the naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Months following Annie's disappearance, the search for her was finally launched after a report from her mother prompted official action. The initial focus of the investigation was her live-in partner, Michael Palin, who quickly emerged as the primary suspect. Michael detailed that on the morning of November 6th, he had woken to find Annie gone, having left their daughter in his care. He recounted that the previous night, Annie had expressed a desire to end their relationship. Michael did not attempt to find Annie, believing that their relationship had conclusively ended and further communication was unnecessary. He also claimed to be unaware of her being reported missing or of her lack of contact with family and friends. Upon inspecting the couple's rented apartment, police found no evidence such as traces, clues, or suspicious items that could provide leads in the case. Annie Tahan's case seemed to have hit a dead end with no large-scale search initiated for the young woman. Her whereabouts, whether she was still alive, and the potential motives of any abductor remained mysteries. The only certain detail was that the last person reported to have seen her was her live-in partner, Michael. For an arduous span of 4 years, there was no news or sightings of Annie. Katie French, her close friend, remained the sole active seeker, tirelessly cooperating with the investigation. Katie invested approximately $16,000 in phone bills alone, employed a private detective, and was steadfast in her determination to continue the search. She reached out to various organizations that could potentially provide insight into Michael Palin's background. Katie personally held a strong belief that Michael was a dangerous individual and should not be trusted. She harbored a deep fear of him, aware that if Michael became aware of her involvement with the police, it could potentially put her in harm's way. In 1993, a significant development occurred in Annie Tahan's case, as it was transferred to the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS, marking a pivotal shift in the investigation. The NCIS agents initiated a comprehensive re-examination of the case starting from scratch. They found Michael Palin at the naval base Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. When police agents approached him to discuss Annie Tahan's disappearance, Michael said he would only talk if his was present. Later, he stopped cooperating altogether. He refused to give any more help or information. The Marine police gathered all the details they could about missing Annie. They then reached out to South Carolina law enforcement. They asked them to check their records for any unidentified bodies, noting that Annie had given birth a month before she went missing. The South Carolina police shared a case about a deceased woman who also gave birth just a month before her death. They provided a sketch of this woman's face, which shocked the Marine police agents when they saw it. They were sure they'd found Annie. The scene revealed a violent murder. Her body was found beside a highway in Jasper County, South Carolina, about 100 miles from where she lived with Michael. The crime scene photos were horrifying, showing a rare level of violence. Annie's face was severely damaged and her skull was broken into 124 pieces, requiring nearly 500 hours of careful work to reconstruct it. Annie's body had been put in a naval bag soaked in gasoline and set on fire. The burning bag was found at 6 a.m. on November 7, 1989. At the same time, Katie French noticed Annie stopped answering her calls. A match of dental records confirmed the woman's identity as Annie Tahan. With this discovery, Michael Palin became the prime suspect in her murder right away. Marine police agents set up a detailed investigation plan, which started with examining his financial activities closely. On the day Annie vanished, investigators found that Michael made a credit card purchase about 25 miles south of where her char remains were found. Digging into his phone records, they discovered that on the Luganozov November 6th, he had made 2 calls to his mother's house in Savannah. The first call was at 4:35 a.m. and the second one at 5:17 a.m. With this evidence, agents hypothesized that Michael may have killed Annie in their apartment, then moved her body to the roadside, where he set it on fire. To push forward with the investigation, NCIS agents aimed to find Michael Palin's ex-wife Dawn Breeze. At the time of Annie's death, Dawn was still married to Michael and living at his mother's house in Savannah. After Annie disappeared, Dawn divorced Michael and started moving around a lot, living in different states as if she were avoiding something or someone. Eventually, agents tracked her down in Miami, Florida. During the summer of 1995, that was almost 6 years after Annie had been murdered. At this point, Dawn had become involved with spiritual practices for income. When agents contacted her at work to discuss Annie's disappearance, her calm response was surprising. She even asked how long they'd talk because she wanted to know if she'd have time to eat. Her reaction wasn't what the agents expected. They thought she'd be more emotional when talking about Annie. Despite being calm during their interaction, inconsistencies began appearing during a lengthy 10-hour interrogation. Initially, Dawn's story matched Michael Palin's version. She said Michael told her that his mistress had left and that he planned to raise their daughter by himself when she visited his apartment. However, inconsistencies emerged regarding when exactly she visited Michael's apartment. At one point during the questioning, Dawn became silent for a moment and looked down before expressing a wish to tell the truth. In a surprisingly emotionless manner, without any tears, she proceeded to share information she had kept hidden for 6 years. Dawn recounted that early one morning urgently summoned her to his Charleston apartment. Upon arrival, Dawn discovered Annie Tahan's lifeless body on the living room floor. Michael donned to go to the bedroom to meet his daughter. At that time, Dawn and Michael were still legally married and shared 3 children. Michael confessed his affair with Annie to Dawn, explaining that it had led to the birth of a daughter. He pleaded with her to accept the child and assist him in raising her. According to Dawn, Michael, unwilling to engage in a custody battle with Annie, opted for murder as a more straightforward solution. On the night transitioning from November 5th to 6th, 1989, Michael and Annie went to bed. After a moment of intimacy, Annie fell asleep. It was then that Michael took a crowbar and began to strike her viciously. Tragically, their daughter Jade was lying next to Annie on the bed throughout this horrific act. Michael relentlessly hit Annie on the head, each blow more brutal than the last. Despite her strength, Annie eventually succumbed to her injuries right there in the bed. In a chilling turn of events, Michael reached out to his wife Dawn, requesting her urgent presence. He then placed Annie's body in a naval bag and transferred it to the trunk of his car, where he had also stored a canister of gasoline. He positioned both his wife and daughter in the car's back seat, before embarking on a lengthy drive of approximately 100 miles. Upon finding a secluded spot by the roadside, Michael removed Annie's body from the trunk, drenched it in gasoline, and set it ablaze. After ensuring that the fire had taken hold, he hurriedly returned to the car and drove Dawn and Jade back to his mother's house in Savannah. Dawn Breeze's revelation provided a pivotal turn in the investigation, marking the first substantial evidence since the discovery of Annie's remains. The investigators then requested Dawn make a monitored phone call to her ex-husband Michael, discussing Annie Tahan's murder. She consented and contacted him accordingly. Michael indicated the need for a serious conversation as Annie's body had been located and identified. Michael's response, "No, they didn't do that," suddenly confirmed to the agents the veracity of Dawn's account. In the call, Dawn also informed Michael that blood had been detected in their former apartment and the NCIS suspected them of involvement in the murder. She urged Michael to devise an explanation for the blood found in the apartment. Michael's reply, "Okay, we need to work together and come up with something," did not include any direct admissions, yet his demeanor suggested a clear understanding of the context of their discussion. He refrained from asking unnecessary questions or offering denials, implying his awareness of the situation. This interaction solidified the theory that Tahan had been murdered. In Michael's apartment, towards the end of their conversation, Michael advised Dawn to be cautious with her phone communications, insisting they would collaboratively manage the situation. NCIS agents took Dawn Breeze to the crime scene to unearth any remaining evidence. To protect her identity and ensure her safety as a cooperating witness, they disguised her before the visit. At the apartment, Dawn meticulously recounted and demonstrated positioning of Annie's body and sequence of events. She pointed out an area near a wall and baseboard where there had been a significant accumulation of blood affecting both carpet and concrete floor beneath it. Since Michael had vacated the apartment, landlords had replaced and cleaned carpets multiple times, explaining absence of visible traces. However, when police applied a special chemical to concrete floor, a large purple stain appeared indicative of protein presence, aligning with Dawn's account where Annie's body had lain. Despite blood seeping into concrete, NCIS faced challenges in conclusively proving substance to be blood. Consequently, search for additional physical evidence continued. Dawn also mentioned a nightstand with television near bed, where Annie was killed. According to her, television had been splattered with blood during murder, and Michael mentioned its need for extensive cleaning due to stains. He later disposed of television, possibly selling rather than discarding it. Michael's pursuit of a functional appliance, considering his frugal nature, felt like searching for a needle in a haystack. Despite this, the agents were resolute in their efforts to locate it. By this point, Michael Palin had become aware of the NCIS surveillance, especially after a phone call with his ex-wife Dawn. This realization triggered paranoia, making him acutely conscious of NCIS monitoring activities. The NCIS agents were concerned that Michael might attempt to flee, coerce witnesses, or potentially inflict harm on others. In a dramatic turn of events during one surveillance mission, Michael tried to evade the authorities. However, his attempt was unsuccessful as the police swiftly caught him. Consequently, on October 11, 1995, Michael Palin was apprehended and taken into custody. While held in a military prison under suspicion of murder, NCIS agents diligently worked to locate and interview all residents of the apartment complex where the murder took place in November 1989. Their perseverance paid off 3 months later when they encountered a neighbor who disclosed he had purchased a television from Michael. Remarkably, the television was still operational and present in his home. Police promptly seized the television and dispatched it to the FBI laboratory for a thorough forensic analysis. To their significant breakthrough, the examination revealed 11 blood spots inside the speaker. These blood samples were identified as matching Annie Tahan's DNA, providing a critical piece of evidence in the ongoing murder investigation. At this stage of the case, Michael Palin's legal representatives announced his willingness to enter a guilty plea if the death penalty was set aside. Even though the prosecutor was unhappy with the way things turned out, military law required that such an agreement be made during the trial. Michael Palin admitted his guilt without showing much emotion. He wrecked the details of his crime with a detachment that was unsettling, almost like reading off a mundane list. His narrative lacked any signs of remorse or empathy. As a result, Michael Palin was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison with chance for parole after 30 years. He also received a dishonorable discharge from the Navy. Despite knowing about her husband's crime and staying silent for 6 years, Dornbreeze avoided legal consequences due to her crucial confession to NCIS. This confession significantly helped advance the investigation. Annie's children, her sons and daughter, have been informed about their biological mother's tragic fate. They understand she did not abandon them. Jade, the daughter Annie had with Michael, has grown into a beautiful woman within the Palmer family. She has notably kept no relationship with her father. In a surprising development, Michael Palin was released from prison in 2013 after serving just 17 years due to good behavior. His exact location is currently unknown. It's advised that anyone who comes into contact with him should exercise caution. Summer Cook was born on December 31st, 1985 in the small town of Logan, Ohio. She grew up in a large family with deeply religious parents. From a young age, Summer and her siblings spent a lot of time at the local church, and their family was well known in the community. She was an outgoing, honest person who had no trouble making friends. Summer got along with everyone and was known for her friendly nature. In school, she stayed busy with ballet, played in the jazz band, and participated in theatrical performances. During her high school years, Summer met a boy named William through their church. They lived on the same street, but before that, they didn't know each other very well. The two started dating, and before long, they decided to get married. Over the next few years, Summer and William had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. The family settled close to William's parents, who helped out with the kids almost every day. William's father was a pastor and also ran a small construction business. At one point, the entire family decided to move to Florida after he landed a construction contract there. However, things didn't go as planned, and a few years later, they moved back to Logan. In 2010, Summer decided to divorce William. She got custody of the kids and moved back in with her parents. Since her parents lived on the same street, William and his family were still able to see the children regularly. By the spring of 2011, 25-year-old Summer was dedicating nearly all her time to raising her 3 children, who were 5, 3, and 2 years old at the time. Because of this, she couldn't take on a full-time job, so she worked part-time as a cleaner at a local bank, just a few minutes' drive from her home. Despite her busy schedule, Summer had plans for the future. She wanted to enroll in college to get an education and eventually find a better-paying job. Around this time, she also started dating a man named Adam, who worked as a handyman. On the evening of March 22nd, Summer went to her usual night shift at the bank, which was scheduled to end around 11:20 p.m. Before heading home, she sent a few messages to her boyfriend Adam, but suddenly stopped responding in the middle of their conversation. At first, Adam thought she might just be busy or running late at work. A bit later, he tried calling her, but Summer didn't answer. Growing concerned, Adam decided to walk over to the bank to check if everything was okay. When he arrived, the first thing Adam noticed was that his car, the one Summer had been using to get to work, was still parked outside. Since her shift had ended almost half an hour ago, he started to feel even more concerned. It was unusual because Summer had always left work at the same time without any delays. He went around to the back door of the bank, which she always used during her shifts, and noticed something behind the dumpster. Lying on the ground were her iPod, car keys, and the battery from her phone. This seemed incredibly suspicious, so Adam immediately called her parents. They confirmed that Summer still hadn't returned home and rushed to the bank. After verifying that the items on the ground did belong to her, they immediately called the police. But to their surprise, her parents quickly learned that they weren't the first ones who contacted the authorities. Just half an hour before they called the police, there had been another report. 2 women who were out for an evening jog had run past the bank and witnessed something horrifying. They saw 2 people in black ski masks grab a woman and force her into a car. The woman struggled and tried to fight back, but she couldn't escape. At the same time, another witness was nearby and he attempted to save her. However, as he approached, a woman stepped out of the car and pepper sprayed him. She then got back into the driver's seat and sped off with the kidnappers and their victim. The 2 joggers immediately ran to the police station, which was only a few blocks away, and reported what they had seen. But instead of springing into action, the officers responded with surprising skepticism. They genuinely thought the women had made the whole thing up, despite their pleas to go and find the abducted person. When the witnesses pressed them to go to the bank and investigate, the officers brushed it off, saying most of their staff were busy conducting traffic stops. Eventually, the women walked to one of their houses, got a car, and drove back to the bank about 20 minutes later. To their surprise, there still wasn't a single police officer at the scene, so they just decided to stay and wait. The officers didn't arrive until nearly an hour later, and even then, they showed little urgency, as if nothing serious had happened. When the husband of one of the women started losing his patience and demanded that they do their job, the police responded with hostility and acted aggressively. Eventually, the officers took action. They determined that the woman who had likely been abducted was Summer. Witnesses also provided a description of the vehicle, a white sedan that the kidnappers had used to flee the scene. The police issued an alert for the car and then went to talk to Summer's relatives to see if they had any idea who might have wanted to hurt their daughter. Summer's parents told investigators that her relationship with her ex-husband William had been rocky for years, even after the divorce. Summer had told them that William's behavior took a drastic turn right after they got married. He saw himself as deeply religious and demanded complete obedience from her. He controlled who she could talk to and spend time with, expected dinner on the table when he got home, and insisted the house be spotless. He even wouldn't let her go to bed without his permission. On top of this, William actually wanted to take a second wife. Although polygamy was illegal, he believed it was acceptable from a religious standpoint and openly shared his plans with Summer. He browsed websites specifically for women interested in such relationships and was actively searching for someone. At the same time, he told Summer she needed to give him 9 more children on top of the 3 they already had. Besides that, William became increasingly aggressive. He wouldn't let Summer leave the house without him, took away her keys and phone, and tried to control her every move. Eventually, she had enough and decided to file for divorce. But William, as well as his parents, were furious about her decision. He tried to gain full custody of their kids and threatened Summer, saying he'd harm her if she took them away from him. Things got even worse when William found out that Summer was seeing someone new. He already knew Adam, and one day he came across a photo on Adam's social media of him with Summer and the kids. That set him off. William started threatening her again and kept fighting for custody in court, but his threats backfired. After hearing about all of this, the judge sided with Summer and gave her full custody of the kids. William's parents weren't ready to let it go either. They tried to discredit Adam by flooding the police with false claims that he was mistreating the kids. Investigators couldn't find any evidence to support these accusations, but William's parents kept pushing, desperate to regain custody of their grandchildren. Digging deeper, the police uncovered something else. About a year earlier, William's father had started his own church and launched a nonprofit organization aimed at helping the homeless and those who had lost their homes. His plans sounded noble. He wanted to build affordable housing for these people. To fund the construction, he began selling lottery tickets and managed to raise several $100,000. But there was a catch. No houses were ever built, and none of the people who bought tickets got their money back. To make things even worse, William's father never gave any explanation about what happened to all the money he'd taken. Around the same time, he lost his license as a priest. While the exact reasons weren't made public, it only added to the questions surrounding him. And just months before Summer disappeared, the family faced yet another blow. They lost their home and were evicted. While the family was still living in their old house, Summer went there to collect the rest of her belongings. She brought Adam along to help load everything into her car and also asked the police to send an officer. She was worried about how her ex-husband's family might react, and her concerns turned out to be justified. William's father immediately became aggressive, demanding that Adam stay off his property. Even with a police officer present, he threatened to shoot and beat Adam. When the officer stepped in to calm things down, William's father lost it and even tried to tackle the officer. That didn't end well. He was arrested and later given a suspended sentence. Investigators also uncovered some unsettling details about William's parents. After William was born, his mother couldn't have more children, which was a devastating blow for her. She became so attached to her grandchildren that she treated them like her own kids. In fact, she even told people that if anything ever happened to William and Summer, she'd take full custody of the children. Summer's parents gave investigators her personal journal, and its contents were heartbreaking. She wrote about how William controlled every part of her life and how his behavior had become more and more aggressive. Summer described feeling like a prisoner in her own home, unable to do anything without his approval. The constant pressure weighed heavily on her, and she often felt like she was living in a nightmare, not reality. After gathering all of this information, the police decided to visit William and his parents, who all lived in the same house. They also discovered that the family owned a car matching the model and color described by witnesses of Summer's abduction. Investigators arrived at their home the day after Summer's disappearance. William claimed that he and his parents had been in town that night. According to him, they had driven to Cleveland about 3 hours away to look at some houses. He added that their car broke down during the trip, forcing them to spend the entire night there, and his parents backed up his story. William claimed he hadn't seen his ex-wife in days, not since he dropped off the kids. But the police weren't just going to take his word for it. They got a search warrant for his house and car, hoping to find something that would disprove his alibi. During the search, investigators found a GPS navigator for a car inside the family's home. After extracting the data, they noticed something odd. The device had been turned off at 5:30 p.m. on the day of Summer's abduction and wasn't turned back on until 7:30 a.m. the next morning. What was odd, though, was that the last location recorded before it was turned off was in Cleveland, where the family said they'd been looking at houses. But Logan. As for the next morning, the GPS showed that the family arrived at a car wash at 7:30 a.m. The police got their hands on the CCTV footage, which showed all three of them carefully cleaning the car, inside and out, and even changing the tires. By the time investigators had pieced everything together, 8 days had already gone by. They kept searching for Summer around the city and the nearby areas, interviewing people and following up on leads. But nothing seemed to bring them any closer to finding her. Once investigators confirmed that William and his parents had lied about their alibi, they brought all three in for questioning. William and his father denied any involvement in Summer's disappearance, so the detectives shifted their focus to his mother. To their surprise, she confessed almost immediately, claiming that Summer was already dead, and began providing details about what had happened. According to her, the family was furious about the court's decision to grant Summer full custody of the children. They had been trying to convince her to let them spend more time with the kids, but after William's threats and his increasingly aggressive behavior, Summer was too scared to leave her children with them for long. So the family came up with a plan. They decided to scare Summer into reconsidering the custody arrangement. Their idea was to abduct and intimidate her, then force her to agree to their terms before letting her go. But things went horribly wrong. After William and his father forced her into the car using a stun gun, William tied her hands with plastic zip ties. Then he took another one and placed it around her neck. When they realized she was struggling to breathe, they tried to remove it, but none of them had a knife to cut it off. As a result, Summer died, and the family knew they had to get rid of her body. They drove to a nearby town where William's parents regularly attended church. Near the church was a large underground septic tank. Thinking it would be the perfect hiding spot, they dumped her body inside and drove away. Although the woman insisted they never planned to kill Summer, her story seemed highly questionable. Given William's repeated death threats and his father's aggressive behavior toward anyone who restricted his access to the grandchildren, investigators suspected that murder might have been their plan from the start. Police went to the church and discovered Summer's body inside the septic tank. Soon after, medical examiners confirmed that the cause of death aligned with the mother's account, and all three family members were arrested and charged with murder. For Summer's family, the entire ordeal was a devastating blow. Not only had her three children lost their mother, but the police's actions, or lack thereof, raised serious questions and outrage. As we know, the police were alerted to the abduction just minutes after it happened, yet they failed to act for over an hour. Medical experts later confirmed that Summer died about 45 minutes after being kidnapped, meaning there was, potentially, enough time to save her. The police could have immediately began looking for the vehicle based on pretty detailed witness descriptions. Considering the abduction happened in the evening in a small town with almost no traffic, investigators might have had a chance to intercept William and his parents. Instead, they justified their delay by saying that most of their officers were tied up with something else. What angered the public even more was that the police station was just a few hundred yards from the bank where the abduction took place. It would have taken just minutes to get there, even on foot. Yet, despite the witnesses, no one came to Summer's aid. Another troubling part of the case was the plea deal offered to William's mother. In exchange for confessing and revealing the location of Summer's body, she got a much lighter sentence. She also testified in court, sticking to her story, and was sentenced to just 15 years in prison. This means she could be out in just a few years. As for William and his father, both were sentenced to life in prison. Since Summer's death, her children have been living with her parents. For the first 6 months after the murder, they struggled with how to break the devastating news to the kids, that they would never see their mom or dad again. The children kept asking when they would see their mom, as well as their paternal grandparents. Eventually, Summer's parents realized they couldn't keep the truth hidden forever. With the help of a child psychologist, they gradually explained what had happened. At the time, they feared their oldest son might hear the truth from his classmates, as the story had become well known throughout Logan. In fact, strangers would occasionally approach the children on the street to express their condolences. This even led Summer's parents to consider changing the children's last names to shield them from being forever linked to the tragedy. As of today, Summer's children have grown up and the family stays out of the public eye. As for William's mother, she's set to be released in 2028. It's unclear whether she'll be legally banned from contacting her grandchildren, but given everything we know about this case, it's possible she may try to reconnect with them. When Ronald Vinci, a millionaire, first encountered Catherine Pileggi, a flight attendant, he felt an immediate sense of love. Little did he know their chance meeting in the skies would ultimately shape their future. Born on August 16, 1940, in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Ronald Vinci displayed an entrepreneurial spirit from an early age. In his 20s, he started his first business venture by renting a space on the Pacific Coast in San Diego to sell Honda motorcycles. Over time, his small shop grew into one of California's largest Honda dealerships. Ron's success didn't stop there. He opened several more car dealerships, steadily increasing his earnings. Those who worked for Vinci often described him as resolute and strong-willed, as well as a demanding employer. Ronald Vinci's personal life included a previous marriage to Pamela. Together, they had a son named Carey. However, their marriage ended in divorce after several years. Following his divorce, Ron indulged in a lavish lifestyle and spent his wealth on extravagant toys. He developed a passion for collecting airplanes and helicopters, even acquiring a large hangar to house his collection. Ronald resided in a spacious house located in Rancho Santa Fe, California. He went to great lengths to obtain permission from the county commission to construct a helicopter pad on his property. Despite objections from neighbors, this allowed him to commute conveniently by helicopter directly from home. Additionally, helicopter pads were installed on the roofs of his car dealerships to further facilitate aerial transportation. In 1990, the paths of 50-year-old Ronald Vinci and 34-year-old Catherine Pileggi crossed unexpectedly in the skies. Catherine was working as a flight attendant when they first met. Catherine Pileggi hailed from a close-knit family and grew up in rural Georgia. During her youth, she participated in beauty pageants and won hearts with her charm and grace. With charisma and a radiant smile, her beauty and pleasant demeanor attracted many admirers and suitors. After finishing her education, Catherine spent several years working as a lab technician in a veterans hospital. However, her aspirations were beyond this job, and she always yearned for more in life. In 1980, Catherine made a significant career change by leaving the hospital and joining Delta Airlines as a flight attendant. At that time, her annual income was $20,000. She enjoyed her new job, tending to passengers' needs and serving meals. Catherine even had some practical knowledge, like using coffee grounds to eliminate unpleasant odors, a handy tip for dealing with spills on airplane seats. In 1990, a decade after starting her flight attendant career, had a fateful encounter on a flight. She met Ronald Vinci, a millionaire, who was immediately drawn to a charming and ever-smiling personality. Despite the significant 14-year age gap between them, the two began a romantic relationship. Catherine then left her career as a flight attendant and moved into Ronald's luxurious home in California. They shared a passion for travel, often visiting Aspen, Colorado, a favorite getaway spot for them. Their relationship spanned 10 years, during which Ronald never proposed to Catherine. Eventually, they chose to part ways. Seeking a fresh start and new companionship, Catherine relocated to Florida in April 2001, at the age of 45. She began a relationship with 63-year-old Dilio Carano, an insurance agent who was financially well off. The couple met through mutual friends. Catherine confided in Dilio about her previous relationship with Ronald Vinci, describing it as tumultuous and unhappy. She revealed that during the decade-long relationship with Ronald, she endured insults from him and had to deal with his heavy drinking and public discussions of his affairs with other women, all while hoping for a marriage proposal that never came from Ronald Vinci. On the contrary, wasted no time and swiftly proposed to Catherine. They tied the knot in May 2001, just a month after they first met. Catherine seemed very happy with the marriage. After their wedding, they began living together in Miami Beach, Florida. Dilio described Catherine's early demeanor in their shared life as resembling that of a domestic cat. Gentle, calm, and quiet, with minimal eating habits. Furthermore, Catherine had a profound fear of water. She couldn't bathe in the ocean or river without experiencing intense anxiety upon entering the water. A few months into their marriage, Dilio began to notice a significant change in his wife's behavior. She increasingly requested money from him, demanding funds for clothes and gifts, while comparing him to her friends' more generous husbands. Dilio estimated that Catherine was withdrawing approximately $55,000 monthly from him. She used educational expenses as an excuse, but failed to provide receipts or evidence of such expenditures. After several months of enduring this financial strain, Dilio decided he had rushed into the marriage and wanted a divorce. Given their lack of children or shared property, the separation was relatively straightforward. Court documents revealed that Dilio Carano had a net worth of $4.5 million, whereas Catherine had only $8,000 in her accounts. As Catherine prepared to move out of Dilio's house, she expressed sadness and despair, lamenting, "What's the point of living? I don't succeed in anything. There's just no meaning in my life." In 2005, Ronald Vinci, a millionaire, made a significant life change by relocating to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Convinced by friends that Florida offered favorable climate conditions and low taxes, at this point, Ron had already sold his car dealerships and accumulated substantial wealth. In Fort Lauderdale, he acquired a luxurious apartment on the 4th floor, enjoying his new residence's comforts. In the same year, Ronald rekindled his relationship with Catherine Pileggi. Catherine, the flight attendant Ron had previously dated, moved into his apartment, rekindling their relationship. Interestingly, Catherine's ex-husband, Dilio Carano, also lived in the same building, but was situated 30 floors below them. Dilio couldn't comprehend why Catherine chose to reconnect with the millionaire she once described as a monster. As their relationship progressed, Catherine became increasingly fixated on marrying Ron. Both Ronald and Catherine were no longer working and led a leisurely lifestyle. Their differences became more evident over time. Ronald was overweight and enjoyed indulging in rich foods. In contrast, Catherine maintained a weight of only 42 kilograms by eating sparingly. Ronald loved lively parties, while Catherine preferred staying home absorbed in crime stories. She rarely wore dresses, opting for shorts and sneakers instead. The couple often traveled together, crossing the sea by boat and visiting Caribbean islands by air. Despite her fear of the ocean, detailed in her diary entries, Ron incessantly encouraged her to conquer her phobia. Even though Ronald possessed considerable wealth, he had a penchant for frequenting budget-friendly bars along the Fort Lauderdale waterfront with friends. There, he would order 1 tacos and strong drinks. He might have been the life of these gatherings, flirting with women, but he often humorously remarked that his appeal to men had long vanished. Their home frequently hosted gatherings where Ronald indulged in alcohol and grew more outspoken. Occasionally, he publicly insulted Catherine in front of their friends, implying she owed everything to him. At these events, usually played a passive role, quietly catering to Ronald's intoxicated demands, serving drinks and snacks and attending to his friends' needs. This dynamic painted a clearer picture of their contrasting personalities and relationship intricacies. Ron's extroverted indulgence versus Catherine's introverted submissiveness. For 5 years, this pattern persisted. However, the millionaire remained hesitant to propose marriage to Catherine. By 2010, Ronald began confiding in friends about his desire to end the equaling and seek a younger companion. In early 2011, Ronald Vinci found himself hospitalized due to severe intestinal issues. These issues were most likely stemming from years of alcohol abuse. The doctors attributed his illness to alcohol consumption, but Vinci noted a recent shift in the taste of his food. A friend jokingly suggested that maybe Catherine had tried to poison him. Dismissed this jest without much thought. In reality, Ronald had neglected his health. His excessive alcohol intake and the habit of consuming numerous pills for relaxation and better sleep were taking a toll on his well-being. In June 2011, Ronald Vinci made a significant purchase, acquiring a new waterfront home in Fort Lauderdale valued at $3 million. Conveniently located just steps away from where his yacht was docked, the property promised comfort. At the age of 70, Ronald looked forward to spending the rest of his life in this residence. He eagerly anticipated visits from his only son, Carrie, and his grandson. Carrie's occupation as a waiter was a subject of jest for Ronald, who humorously claimed that Carey was eagerly anticipating his father's passing. On the afternoon of June 28, 2011, the gardener of Ronald Vinci made a distressing call to 911, reporting an incident involving his employer. When the police arrived at the scene, they discovered the lifeless body of the millionaire in a guest bedroom. Shockingly, his body had been meticulously wrapped in plastic bags, tightly taped, and placed inside a sleeping bag along with soiled sheets. And on top of it all was a substance resembling wet dirt, later identified as coffee grounds. Further examination revealed a slashed mattress beneath the blanket on the bed. The gardener informed the police that according to Catherine Pileggi, Ronald had fallen down the stairs, suffered a head injury, and subsequently passed away. The officers had deep suspicions that Ronald Vinci's death was not accidental. During police interrogation, the gardener provided a chilling account of the events leading up to the discovery of Vinci's lifeless body. According to his testimony, Catherine Pileggi had called him late at night, urgently requesting his presence at Vinci's residence. Upon his arrival in the morning, he was confronted with the sight the millionaire's body wrapped tightly in a sleeping bag in one of the guest bedrooms. Catherine, distressed and tearful, implored the gardener to assist her in burying Ron. She revealed that Vinci had expressed a lifelong wish to be laid to rest in the ocean after his demise. To carry out this plan, she had purchased a blue container intended to hold Vinci's body, with the intention of taking it out to sea using the millionaire's yacht. By the time the gardener alerted authorities, Catherine had already brought this container home and placed it in the garage. Upon conducting a thorough examination, the medical examiner made gruesome findings. Ronald Vinci, aged 70, had sustained 9 stab wounds to his chest and neck. He bore marks consistent with hammer blows on his head and had ultimately met his demise from a gunshot wound to the head. On June 27th evening, Ronald Vinci's friends visited his house. Catherine prepared the meal and Ron provided drinks during their gathering. During dinner, Ron mentioned that his passport and one of his pistols were missing. He also complained that the food tasted unusually bitter. Unexpectedly, Ron, who was known for staying up late, said he wasn't feeling well and went to bed as early as 7:30 p.m., an unusual time for him. His friends eventually found this early bedtime odd and left his house afterward. Catherine Pileggi, aged 54, was brought in for questioning a few hours later, where she provided a detailed confession. She recounted events around 1 a.m., shedding light on what transpired that fateful night. On June 28th, a drunk Ronald Vinci woke up and began verbally insulting Catherine. The situation escalated as he chased her down the stairs, stumbled and fell, hitting his head severely. Catherine claimed she helped him up and guided him to a guest bedroom on the first floor. Afterward, she cleaned the bloodstains on the stairs. A few hours later, she entered the guest bedroom to check on Ron, finding him asleep with a loaded gun on the nightstand. Fearing that Vinci intended to kill her, Catherine acted out of fear and desperation. She grabbed the gun and fatally shot him in the head. During interrogation, Catherine admitted she was very scared and angrier than she had ever been before, feeling like her soul had left her body. After the shooting, she inflicted numerous additional wounds on Ron using a knife and a hammer. Catherine then wrapped his body in a bag and attempted to conceal the evidence by calling the gardener. When she realized she couldn't dispose of the body alone, surveillance camera photos showed Catherine purchasing a large blue container at a hardware store after the murder. This container was intended to be used for disposing of Ronald's body in the ocean. Authorities discovered a gun matching the one used to shoot Ronald in Catherine's car with her fingerprints on it. Her Bentley also contained incriminating items such as a knife, cut-up pieces of a mattress, clothing, and rubber gloves, all stained with Ronald's blood. Consequently, Catherine faced a charge of first-degree murder and was subsequently arrested and detained. Further investigations revealed that just a month before the murder in May, Catherine had been involved in a legal dispute wherein her sister accused her of borrowing money but refusing to repay it. Catherine defended herself by claiming that the money was a gift, and therefore refused to return it to her sister. On May 17th, the court ruled in favor of Catherine in this dispute. Ronald's neighbors reported hearing screams from Vinci's house on the night of the crime. Additionally, a witness spotted a white car with a large trailer near Vinci's home early in the morning. This car belonged to the gardener. Ronald Vinci's friends disclosed that he had been contemplating ending his relationship with Catherine for quite some time. The couple had not been intimate for several months and even slept in separate rooms within their large house. Just a few weeks before the tragedy, attempted to give Catherine $1 million through one of his workers, requesting her to leave his house permanently. Prosecutors believed that Catherine's primary motive was the fear of losing her wealthy partner. However, Catherine's defense argued that she had been a victim of severe abuse during her relationship with Ronald and acted in self-defense. Questions arose regarding why she did not immediately contact the police, why she did not tell the truth right away, and why she endured the alleged abuse for years without leaving him. Some of Catherine's relatives defended her in court, and a court psychiatrist identified some signs of domestic violence. Nonetheless, none of Ronald's close associates could confirm witnessing any mistreatment in their relationship. They described Catherine as calm and noted that she never complained about her life. During the court proceedings, Catherine made a startling accusation against Ronald Vinci, claiming he was responsible for the sudden death of her younger sister Angela 3 years prior, in December 2009. Catherine, Ronald, and Angela had embarked on a Caribbean cruise together. Angela had been struggling with substance abuse issues and consumed excessive alcohol during a party on the cruise, leading to severe illness and intense convulsions. In an effort to help her sister, performed artificial respiration. Tragically, Angela's heart stopped beating, resulting in her death. It later emerged that Ronald had provided Angela with some pills on the evening of the cruise, presumably to help her relax. Catherine firmly believed these pills were a contributing factor in her younger sister's death. In 2014, a jury found Catherine PGI guilty of the murder of Ronald Vinci. Consequently, she was sentenced to 25 years in prison. She is currently serving her sentence at the LEL Correctional Institution in Marin County, Florida. Her potential release date is set for January 2034, when she will be 77 years old. The story of successful and wealthy Ronald Vinci took a tragic turn. Due to his ill-fated relationship with quiet and unassuming flight attendant, Catherine PGI. Despite his many wise decisions in life, this particular relationship ultimately proved to be a fatal error for the millionaire. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.